The clock that went backwards every All Souls' Eve. Imagine having an antique clock at home, passed down from generation to generation, that works perfectly, except for one night a year. Every All Souls' Eve, at exactly 3 a.m., he stops. And not just stops, he starts walking backward. At first, it was just a strange detail, a family legend, but everything changed when one of the grandchildren decided to open the watch and discovered something hidden inside. A name, a date, and a handwritten message, like a warning. Since then, time has never been the same, and what you're about to hear now, maybe it will change what you think about inheritances, broken promises, and everything that time tries to hide. If stories like this give you chills and make you question what's real, like and subscribe to the channel. There's much more mystery to come. It was an old house, the kind that holds stories in its walls and whispers in its floorboards. In its center, hanging on a dark, weather-beaten wooden wall, was a grandfather clock. It wasn't just old, it was a silent heir to a legacy not everyone in the family dared speak aloud. The watch had been passed down from generation to generation for over 100 years, ever since Raphael's great-grandfather received it from a mysterious man dressed in black and with eyes that seemed to see through the soul. The gift was delivered with just one sentence: "Beware of All Souls' Day. He doesn't like to be ignored." Raphael, now 29, grew up hearing his family whisper about the clock. According to the stories, it always worked perfectly, except on one specific date, November 1st, the eve of All Souls' Day. On this one day of the year at exactly 3 a.m., it stopped, but not just stopped. The hands began to move, backward. At first, Raphael thought it was an exaggeration, something designed to scare children. But the first time he witnessed the phenomenon, at age 12, he knew there was something deeply wrong with the object. It was as if time, in that moment, was being pulled by an invisible force, inverting its logic. The familiar ticking became a deep, slow ringing, and each second echoed through the house, as if opening a door between worlds. His grandmother said it was the call of forgotten time. His great-uncle, who never spoke again after a certain November 1st, simply looked at the clock and made the sign of the cross. There was a strange, almost sacred respect surrounding that mechanism. The adults in the family had strict rules. No one was to be in the living room at 3 a.m. on All Souls' Eve. No one was to watch the clock at that time, much less touch it. These instructions were delivered with a seriousness that left the child Raphael more intrigued than frightened. But what always bothered him was the elders' insistence on calling the clock a sentinel, as if it were more than an object, as if it were waiting for something or someone. As time passed and his family grew older and departed, Raphael became the last of his direct line to still maintain the house, and with it, the clock. He tried to convince himself that these were just stories, that fear was inherited along with the clock. But something inside him told him that that year, everything would change. It was October. The leaves were already beginning to dry, and the smell of damp wood filled the hallways. And then, in the last week of the month, the clock began to do something new, echo a soft melody in the early hours, a tune no one recognized but which seemed familiar. Raphael decided that on All Souls' Day, he would not only be awake at 3 a.m., but he would also observe everything, and if necessary, he would play. Perhaps time really was trying to tell him something, and he was ready to listen. To understand the clock, one had to go back in time. Raphael's great-grandfather, known as Alfredo, was a skeptical, practical, and hard-working man. He wasn't given to superstitions until the day in 1911, returning from a pilgrimage through the countryside of Minas Gerais. He met an old hermit who lived on the side of a forgotten road. The man, according to an old family diary, seemed to be waiting for him. Without explanation or request, the old man handed him a box wrapped in dark cloth, with a warning in an almost prophetic tone. This object holds the time of a soul. It should not be ignored in the dawn of remembrance. Curious and impressed, Alfredo took the clock home. It was a handmade pendulum, engraved, with inscriptions in a language no one could identify. There were symbols, small crescent moons, and the design of an inverted hourglass engraved on its base. For the first year, everything went smoothly. But in November 1912, something unusual happened. At exactly 3 a.m. on All Souls' Eve, the clock stopped. When Alfredo tried to adjust it, the hands began to move backward. He froze. At the same moment, a cold breeze swept through the house, and one of the hallway mirrors cracked. Since then, this phenomenon has repeated itself religiously year after year. Alfredo tried to get rid of the clock, but every time he removed it from the house, some kind of misfortune would occur. Unexplained fainting spells, the deaths of pets, even a small fire. In 1923, he finally accepted the clock as part of the family and sealed it with a promise. Never again will it be removed. Never again will it be forgotten. Subsequent generations maintained the tradition. The women in the family said the clock told more than just the hours. It held the echoes of an unpaid debt. Prayers were said before it on All Souls' Day as a way to appease wounded time. The origin of the clock, the hermit's name, and the soul to whom that time belonged. None of this was discovered, but the feeling that he was conscious, that he observed those who passed by, never disappeared. For Raphael, this story was just a legend, until the night the music began, and he understood that time might want to be heard once again. Raphael tried to keep his life as rational as possible. With a degree in engineering, he always believed in science, logic, and calculations. But every year, as October approached, a silent tension took over the house. It wasn't just the clock, it was the air, the way the rooms seemed colder, the way even the paintings seemed to stare at him more intensely. Since his adolescence, he had noticed small signs that there was something beyond what met the eye, but he never wanted to believe it. At 16, he saw his great-aunt talking to herself with the clock in the early hours of All Souls' Day. She cried, said names he didn't recognize, and begged for forgiveness. When confronted, she simply replied, "There are things that need to be said every year, so that the soul isn't lost forever." At 20, he found a notebook hidden in his home library. Its pages contained accounts of each year, dates, names, sensations, visions, and even strange drawings. Some pages were missing, others were smudged with dark spots. One entry caught his eye. 2010, he tried to stop it. Now, time will begin again. Raphael didn't tell anyone he'd read the notebook, but he began to avoid the living room where the clock stood. He'd place furniture in front of the door, trying to pretend the room didn't exist. But strangely, every path in the house always seemed to lead him back there. His grandmother, before she passed away, asked him to promise something. Never touch the clock on All Souls' Eve. And if it rings by itself, just listen. Never answer, Raphael promised. But promises made out of fear don't usually last, especially when logic starts to crumble. In the last week of October, the clock began to do more than just chime. It creaked. It made a metallic sound, as if someone were fiddling with the gears inside. Sometimes the sound was accompanied by whispers. Raphael began recording the late-night audio, and one night he distinctly heard the word, "Come back." It was then that he decided to open the salon. He removed the furniture, cleaned the dusty floor, and stood before the clock as he hadn't done in years. He felt a shiver run down his spine. The pendulum moved slowly, even without a winding. And for a brief second, he had the impression that the minute hand was following him with its eyes. It was October 30th. He knew he only had 2 days left, and deep down, something told him the clock was waiting for him. In the nights following the salon's reopening, Raphael began to be haunted by the same dream. Always the same scene, a dark field shrouded in mist with a hooded figure standing in the distance. This figure didn't approach, merely extending its arm and pointing to an invisible point on the horizon, while saying in a low, hoarse voice, "The weather is correcting itself." Raphael always woke at the same time, 3 a.m., breathing heavily, with the feeling that the chill of the dream had seeped through the sheets and settled into the room. At first, he thought it was stress, but the dreams continued, and they didn't come alone. When he woke up every night, the clock in the living room was exactly 3 a.m. Even though Raphael had left, it stopped hours earlier. Even though the gears were disassembled or the pendulum motionless, the clock insisted on showing that time, as if time there obeyed a different logic. Intrigued, Raphael began to write down everything: dreams, sensations, schedules, phrases he heard. Every detail was recorded. A pattern began to emerge. The hooded figure always appeared in the same position, but each night it seemed a little closer, as if it were moving slowly toward him. In the early hours of October 31st to November 1st, the dream changed. The figure didn't just point, it now spoke more clearly. Time is coming. When Raphael opened his eyes, the hall clock was showing 3 hours. But there was a new detail. The pendulum was spinning backward, slowly, as if time were being unraveled, rewinding line by line. On the living room floor, Raphael found a black feather. There were no birds in the house, nor any open windows. He carefully picked up the feather and put it away in a drawer, as if it were a piece of a very old puzzle that was finally beginning to be put together. The next night, the dream repeated itself, but this time the field was empty. No figures, just a broken hourglass on the ground. And in the sky, the sound of chimes coming from all directions. Raphael woke up with the certainty that he had crossed a border. Something had changed, and the clock still read 3. But now, the hands were moving backward on their own. On the night of November 1st, Raphael decided he could no longer ignore the signs. The clock wasn't just a family heirloom, it seemed to be a bridge between times, between realities. That early morning, shortly before 3 a.m., he sat in front of the clock, holding the black feather in one hand, and in the other, an antique key, which, according to his grandmother, opened the back of the clock. No one had ever dared to use it, but Raphael was ready to break the taboo. The silence was absolute. No sound came from the street, no cars passed. Everything seemed suspended in time. As the hands approached 3, he turned the key and unlocked the back of the clock. The wood creaked as if in protest. Raphael slowly opened the lid and for a moment felt as if the air had changed density, cooler, heavier. Inside the clock, beyond the ancient gears, was a hidden compartment. There lay an aged envelope, sealed with red wax. Trembling, Raphael opened it. Inside, a yellowed sheet of paper bore shaky writing in ink darkened by age. At the top, a name, Vicente Salazar. Below, a date, November 1st, 1871. And finally, a sentence that sent chills down Raphael's spine. He ran away from what he owed, but time never forgets. At that moment, the clock made a metallic sound, unlike any chime he had ever heard. A dry, continuous sound, as if time itself were creaking. Startled, Raphael tried to close the compartment, but the lid seemed held shut by an invisible force. The pendulum began to spin uncontrollably, making the hands tick as if marking all the minutes at once. Outside, a gale arose, even though no windows were open. Papers flew, the black quill disappeared from the drawer by itself. And finally, the door to the living room flung open, revealing the densest darkness Raphael had ever seen. He felt a presence, something large, ancient, as if the house itself recognized that Vicente's debt now fell upon it. With effort, Raphael managed to close the compartment and lock the lid. The clock stopped. A deep silence fell. The wind ceased. The pendulum stopped. The next morning, he woke up on the living room floor, the envelope in his hands. The clock read 6:33, the first time he'd seen that number there in years, but Raphael knew this wasn't the end. It was just the last straw, the one that had made time begin to count down with full force. Raphael couldn't sleep that night. Even after everything seemed to have returned to normal, the weight of that sentence, he ran away from what he owed, but time never forgets, hammered at his mind. Who was Vicente Salazar? And why was his name on the clock that had belonged to his family for generations? Sitting at the kitchen table, the old envelope in hand, the sun slowly rising, Rafael decided to investigate. He began by asking his grandmother, the only member of the family still alive who remembered the old stories. When she heard the name, she paled. She told him that Vicente was a distant relative, a man who had mysteriously disappeared in 1871, precisely on All Souls' Day. According to rumors at the time, he had been involved with a secret spiritualist group and had made a promise, one that was never kept. They said he had fled a ritual, breaking the bond with something that demanded payment. The broken promise had left an energetic scar on the family. Grandmother said that, since then, every generation had felt the weight of a presence on All Souls' Eve, but no one had ever dared to investigate. The clock had been sealed to keep time in order, and perhaps to keep Vicente away. Rafael, restless, decided to search public records. He found an old newspaper dated November 2nd, 1871, with a single note in the bottom corner. Man disappears after interrupted ritual. Witnesses speak of broken oath and objects moving by themselves. The description matched what had happened in the house. Intrigued, he took the envelope to a symbology expert. The man confirmed that the red wax seal on the envelope was used by esoteric societies in the 19th century, especially those involved in time manipulation and reincarnation cycles. The phrase, "time never forgets," was a hallmark of these doctrines. For them, time was not just a line, but a consciousness. And when someone betrays him, he waits. But he exacts revenge. Each new piece of information reinforced the feeling that Rafael had awakened. Something, the clock, now silent, seemed to be watching, and every time he passed by it, the hands vibrated slightly. That night, Rafael had a dream. He was in an ancient hall, surrounded by hooded figures, and before him, Vicente Salazar. He didn't speak. He just pointed at Rafael, and then at the clock. In the background, the sound of the pendulum swinging backward. Rafael woke with a terrible certainty. He hadn't just discovered a family secret, he had assumed the debt. And now, time no longer saw him as an heir, but as the new debtor. Haunted by the previous night's revelations, Rafael spent the next day obsessively searching for more clues. He needed to understand the extent of the debt that, by all appearances, now fell upon him. His first step was to visit his grandmother's old attic, a dusty place where objects forgotten by time slept silently. There, among old boxes and faded portraits, he found a notebook bound in dark leather with the name Vicente S. engraved in faded letters. As he leafed through the notebook, he realized it was a diary. The pages, handwritten in elegant script, recounted spiritual experiences, encounters with mediums, and notes on rituals performed with a group called the Vigil Circle. One of the most striking passages read, "The promise has been made. Time will be my ally or my debt collector." Rafael felt a shiver. The signature at the bottom of the page was clear. Vicente Salazar, October 31st, 1871. Rafael took the diary to a spiritualist study center in the city. The researchers who met him confirmed the existence of the Vigilant Circle, a society that believed in time consciousness and intergenerational spiritual accountability. According to them, when a promise was made to a temporal entity and broken, the debt could span generations until a compatible energy heir was found. Rafael felt that person was now himself. The researchers warned him. The only way to break this cycle would be to reenact the ritual and fulfill the original promise. But no one knew what it was. The clue might lie in the clock or in the place where Vicente disappeared. Rafael then traveled to the town where his ancestor had lived. With the help of municipal archives, he found what remained of Vicente's former property, today just ruins overgrown with forest. When night fell, he took his watch and diary with him. He sat among the moss-covered stones and lit a candle. He opened the diary to the last page, where there was a circular drawing with unfamiliar symbols. When he placed the watch over the drawing, the hands began to spin violently backward. The surrounding forest fell completely silent. Raphael heard footsteps behind him, and when he turned, he saw the silhouette of a hooded man, just like the one from his dream. The man raised his hand and pointed at Raphael, who instinctively repeated the line from his diary, "Time will be my ally, or my debt collector." At that very moment, the clock stopped. But now, it read exactly 3 a.m., the same time as always. Raphael felt something leaving his body, as if an invisible chain had snapped. And then the figure disappeared into the trees. On the way back, he noticed the clock was no longer ticking, but it wasn't going backward either. It was as if time had finally found rest, or it was just waiting for the next broken promise. In the days following the strange encounter in the ruins, Raphael returned home carrying the watch and diary as if they were pieces of a still incomplete puzzle. At first, everything seemed calm, but as the nights wore on, subtle signs began to manifest and quickly became impossible to ignore. The first morning after the trip, Raphael woke to a metallic sound echoing down the hallway. Upon investigating, he found the clock, now silent, hanging again on the living room wall, exactly where it had been before it was dismantled. The most disturbing detail, no one had put it there. He lived alone. The next night, the bathroom mirror fogged up even without a hot shower. In the center, in letters drawn in the steam, was the same phrase from the diary, "Time will be my collector." Raphael rubbed the mirror, but the words reappeared, as if they were being written from within. As the days passed, the phenomena intensified. Lights flickered at 3 a.m. sharply. Doors slammed violently. Objects were moved. And on more than one occasion, Raphael had the distinct sensation of being watched, especially in front of the clock. He began to notice shadows forming in the reflection of the glass, shadows that had no origin in the surroundings. Seeking help, Raphael consulted a medium. Upon touching the clock, she immediately pulled her hands away and said, "This is an anchor, an open link between times. What has been awakened is not yet finished." Frightened, Raphael began recording the events on video. In a recording made at 3:03 a.m., the camera captured the sound of whispers in Latin. Experts who watched the footage translated it as repetitio temporis, solutio in sanguine, repetition of time, solution in the blood. Desperate, Raphael began to lose sleep, his appetite, and his sanity. Voices appeared out of nowhere. The clock, even without a winding, began to tick again, always backward. The slow, heavy beats marked a time that was no longer human, a time that demanded, punished, and insisted. Until, in a final attempt to put an end to it all, Raphael decided to follow the diary entries to the exact spot where Vicente had made the original promise. There, amidst forgotten rubble, Raphael did something unthinkable. He injured his own finger and let a drop of blood fall onto the watch. At the same moment, he heard deep breathing coming from behind him. But when he turned, there was nothing, only silence. Back home, the clock finally stopped. The voices ceased, but the bathroom mirror continued to fog up, even without the steam. And every morning, the same sentence appeared, "Promise acknowledged. Debt observed." Raphael understood. Maybe he hadn't ended the cycle, just restarted it for the next generation. Raphael didn't sleep that night. After the incident in the old building and the blood spilled on the clock, the feeling that something had been awakened was unbearable. Shadows didn't just appear in reflections, they now moved throughout the house. Time, once linear and predictable, seemed to bend around him. He determined it was time to act. He couldn't bear another late night being watched by unseen eyes, nor listen to whispers that bordered on madness. Digging through his journal entries, he found a quote, "The cycle only ends where it all began. Only time knows the way back." Raphael investigated his family's origins and discovered an ancient cemetery far from the city where Vicente, the ancestor linked to the spiritual promise, had been buried. With his watch wrapped in a cloth and his diary in hand, he drove there. The night fog made the journey even more gloomy. At 2:40 a.m. he arrived. He searched among the worn tombstones until he found the name Vicente de la Cerda. As he approached, the clock began to vibrate slightly. Raphael knelt before the tombstone and removed the clock from its cover. Just as the hand moved to 3 and stopped, he felt an intense presence, not threatening, but profoundly sad. He remembered the medium's words. This is an anchor, and perhaps this grave was the only place capable of holding such a link. He dug a small space in the damp earth and buried the watch there, placing the diary on top, open to the page that read, "He ran away from what he should have, but time never forgets." The moment it covered the hole, the wind died. Silence fell like a veil. No sound, not of crickets, not of leaves. Only darkness and the end. When he returned home, he noticed something different. The bathroom mirror, previously riddled with recurring messages, was now clean. For the first time in weeks, he slept deeply, without dreams. In the morning, when he glanced at the kitchen clock, he smiled. It was 7:22 a.m., and he was right on time. But that same day, an 8-year-old nephew visiting the house innocently asked, "Uncle, who is the man with the hat standing there in the hallway?" Raphael froze. Maybe time forgives, but it never forgets. The clock never worked again. Ever since the night he was buried next to Vicente de la Cerda's tomb, time seemed to slow down. Raphael now lived calmer days, but never completely free of the feeling that something remained lurking. The house returned to normal. No 3 a.m. chimes, no distorted reflections in the mirrors. But the peace wasn't complete. It was merely a truce, as if time had accepted the return of a debt, but remained vigilant. In the weeks that followed, Raphael began attending spiritualist meetings. He sought answers, or at least some kind of explanation. During one of these sessions, an elderly woman observed him carefully and said, "You returned something that didn't belong to you, but it still carries the echo of what was promised." These words stuck in his mind. Raphael understood that not all burdens are completely released. Some merely change form. He began to study more about the history of his lineage, delving into manuscripts, old newspapers, and occult records. He discovered that Vicente had participated in a ritual with secluded 19th century monks who believed that certain objects could imprison time and spiritual debt. The watch, therefore, was not just an instrument. It was a seal. One night, while leafing through the diary again, he found a loose leaf he hadn't noticed before. It was blank, except for a single sentence, written in the same handwriting as the note inside the clock. "If time stops again, don't open it." He put the paper in a box, locked it, and placed it in the back of the closet. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Because now he knew, some stories don't end, they just fall asleep. And somewhere, maybe in another house, in another time, another clock is counting down the seconds to wake up again.